The next speaker I'm looking forward to introducing, he's a colleague of mine normally. Morgan Gronold is the Special Projects Officer for RAPAD, the Remote Area Planning and Development Board. And he's here today to talk to you about a project we've been working on in RAPAD for some time. It's about the fence that's saving the outback. Take it away, Morg.
Thank you very much, Nicole, and welcome everyone to the 2021 here in Longreach in central Western Queensland. As Nicole indicated, I'll be talking today about a project that's very close to my heart, one that's been a real privilege to be a part of the last few years, and that's the fence that's saving the outback. So before I start, and I know there's viewers from not only in Queensland, from across Australia, so I just thought I'd start with a little bit of sort of who we are and sort of where we are. So RAPAD is the Remote Area Planning and Development Board. It's based here in central Western Queensland. So we're that yellow area there on the blue map. It's up nearly 400,000 square kilometres, or about 20%, a bit over 20% of Queensland. It's about 10,500 people, and there's 7 local government areas. So for those people that haven't been in this part of the world before, they're places like Barcaldine and Longreach and Winton and Blackall, Tambo, Boulia, Junda, Diamantina, etc. So when I talk about where the fence is and what we're doing, this is the area that we're there talking about. So the challenge, one of the challenges we've found here since the 1990s is we've seen a significant drop in sheep numbers. So for those that are old enough that can cast their minds back before the 1990s and think back to the Jack Thompson movies of Sunday Too Far Away and the sheep of the 50s and 60s out in this part of the world, it was an area that really did build much of Queensland and Australia on the sheep's back. So we've seen a downturn in sheep numbers from the 90s, from sort of 2 million plus, back to about sort of 450,000. And with this, we've seen, and that's as much of a concern, but with this, we've seen lambing rates falling as well. So we've seen, what is traditionally an area that produces sort of 70 plus percentage for lambing rates, sort of back to sort of 10 or 15%. And as you can imagine, for communities like mine in Barcaldine and others in the region that have really built themselves up on the sheep industry, this has caused significant economic, environmental, and social impacts across the whole region. And I must say that while all this is going on, all the usual pests such as trapping and baiting and whatnot are still all going on. They're all sort of still in place. So this is happening whilst that's going. Whilst this has a large impact on communities here, and in the 2011-15 census, we saw a 14% average population loss for that RAPAD region, that piece of yellow on the Queensland map before it. I haven't looked at the most recent census period, but I imagine it's about the same. And what we found through not just the census data, but also some of the work from the Western Queensland Drought Alliance there, that we've seen almost 700 or 700 plus ag jobs lost in this region period. So for us, when these discussions about what could we do and what could happen, this is really about more than just defence for those of us living here in the regions. When we talk about, so we go from a regional perspective back down to an individual landholder perspective. So the stuff that's in italics there that you'll see on this screen and the screens going forward are what the landholders are telling us. So a landholder north of Barcaldine, told us that, in the last 3 or 4 years, just in their immediate area, so just around them and their property, they shot 750 to 800 dogs. And when I say dogs, I mean wild dogs, and the dogs are still coming. The next quote comes from a producer southwest of Longreach down towards Junda that, after they lost 200 ewes in one paddock in 2 weeks, he said he was not bringing the sheep home until they were fenced. So that's a couple of examples, a couple more just to demonstrate the significance of it for us here. And it's not just here, it's in, populations across Queensland and some of the other states, the impact wild dogs are having. It's certainly not a new sort of topic. Another producer from down near Isisford, 100% scanned in lamb ewes were only returning 55% lambing. So, they just got out in 2016. They just sold all the sheep and basically, had to change industries because the losses, were just too great. And and another one further south in Block. As part of this process, what did it actually cost them in a financial terms? They said, look, their lambing percentage went from 80 to 30%. They lost 11,000 plus lambs. 50% of lambs born. It cost them $1.4 million in one 12-month period. The impact of the dogs were having on their enterprise. So what was the solution? And I mean, these discussions started in about 2014 and 15, and obviously local producers and councils came together and said, look, we can't make it rain, but what we can try and do is somehow halt the impact of wild dogs on the region. And so the cluster fencing model was born. It was developed in the region for the region, with the long-term goal of being a catalyst for growing jobs and increasing rural profitability, both now and going forward. So it wasn't obviously just about rural profitability as in landholder profitability, but it's about filling those empty shops in the main street, getting class numbers growing in schools, getting footy teams, sort of back and going. I mean, I've been in Barkey about 20 years, and I can remember playing, when I first got here, playing footy against Muttaburra. They had arguably the best rugby team in the West, the All Blacks, as we used to call them, because most of them were Kiwi shearers that were up. I mean, Muttaburra hasn't fielded a rugby team for 10 or 15 years. So it's not just the impact that's happening on landowners themselves, but it's also flowing through to people in the main street. The other part of this model that's important to reinforce is that it is a clear governance and partnership model. So there are a significant amount of rules in place. Obviously, it is government funding combined with producer, individual landholder funding. So there is quite a structured monitoring and evaluation process that goes along with it. So what does it look like? Well, it looks like the state and federal governments came together and said, look, what we'll do is we'll subsidise these fences. So when I talk about exclusion fences here, they're the erection of 1.5 metre high exclusion fences with an apron on the bottom. The subsidy is $2,700 per kilometre. Look, I'd have to say the average price now for a kilometre of fencing in this part of the world is probably sits at around 12,000. So 12, depending on channels and water courses and bits and pieces like that. So obviously the subsidy is there to try and pardon the pun, get people off the fence, but get them back out and fencing. Fencing as a solution is not particularly new. But many of you remember the dog fences that were built out here in the 20s and 30s. So we're really reinventing that or evolving that concept into this cluster model where groups of landholders are getting together and fencing using this exclusion fencing to close themselves off or try and ensure that they've got an area that is the dogs can't get into, and then to try and get their lambing and sheep numbers back up. Now, most of the landholders that have been involved, and I'll get into that in a little while, saying, look, the key point for them is it's delivering control, confidence, and investment. So control of their finances. Obviously, as many of the landholders on this conference will understand, you see a dog and you start chasing them, and it just burns time, and it's like going into a black hole, and it's time that you can't get back, that you can't put into a more profitable or more positive part of your business. So people are finding that they're getting control of their time back. They're getting control of their finances back, as I said. So you can put 200 in a couple of weeks, 200 of them will be there, which is great. It's also giving them the confidence to say that they're going to be here for the long term. Most landholders are, custodians of their land and want to provide it in better shape to their children and grandchildren. And we've seen a lot of people who, when they didn't feel like, and I suppose it's a very human thing, when they're not feeling like they're in control, they haven't really got the confidence to, say we are going to be here for the next 10 or 15 years and we can leave it in a better state than we found it. And that's leading to that investment. So all of a sudden people are looking around and saying, well, I am going to be here for the next 10 or 15 years now. So, that tank and piping that I was going to do, we should do that. And the shearing shed needs a bit of a tidy up and a few things. And that's drawing more investment into the communities, more work, on those landholders' places. But obviously as people start to fence themselves little clusters, through the region, it also provides significant biosecurity advantages. If there was something like foot and mouth or disease outbreaks in this part of the world, we can actually control, the flow of animals in and around those areas. So what does a solution look like for the landholders that are out there and that have done it? So I'll just go through a couple of examples here. The first example is from a producer north of Barcaldine, up the other side of Aramac, and they basically said, as it says there, that they've shorn 22,000 sheep this financial year. All of those wages went into Longreach. If we didn't have the fence, there just wouldn't be any sheep at home because of the impact of dogs, and none of these wages would be going into town. Similarly, another producer there of Longreach on the way to Winton, for the last 5 years, they've averaged a lambing of less than 40%. Thanks to the fence, it's now got back over 80%. Last year without the fence, they got 26 dogs, and this year they got one. So you can see the sort of significant impact or change in what it's delivering for people's time and control. So what does the fences saving the outback actually look like? So I certainly encourage everyone, and I'll put this website link up again. This not just a fence. So far we've completed 4 rounds of fencing here in the region. That's 48 clusters or 48 groups of landholders, a minimum of 2 people, and they enclose an area. 168 properties are involved. We've done just over 4,000 kilometres of fencing to protect just over 2 million hectares. And the sheep numbers, and so these sheep numbers come from the landholders themselves. So when they start, they tell us, what numbers they've got now, and then they indicate where they'd like to get to, all things being equal, season and livestock prices being reasonable. And so, yeah, what the numbers are saying to us is that we'll go from, 240 odd thousand sheep up to well over 700,000 once they get to that point. So I suppose just some more stats and what it means to them. So the region's fenced an area larger than Wales. It's created 140 permanent jobs in ag and the flow-on jobs from there. I should say these aren't my figures. We use Hall Chadwick, an independent firm, to audit the figures and the modelling that we do. From a regional income point of view, it's created $20 million, $28 million per year every year, and that's done with $11 million of government funding. So that comes back to that $2,700 a kilometre that I've spoken about. But also landholders have chipped in $30 million of their own money. So it's a very unique model in that regard. Usually when government builds a roundabout in your street or whatever, they don't go and ask everyone in the street to sort of chip in for it. Whereas here, the landholders themselves are actually paying for sort of 75 or 80%, if not more, of the cost. So if we talk about returns, so the return on the government money is $2.83 per dollar into the future, which basically means that if you give us $1, we'll increase your regional income by $2.83 every year after that. And for every $85,000 of one-off funding, this project will create a permanent job in the region, and that potentially brings back a family and puts more kids in schools and more kids in footy teams across the region. So what does it look like? Here's an example of a producer south of Barcaldine. They built their shearing shed in 2008. In 2010, they were completely out of sheep. The dogs had just wiped them out. This is the first mob of sheep that's come through their shed since then. And so you can see this is what it's about. It's about, woolly sheep and jobs and getting people back into these regional communities. Look, if you want to learn a bit more or hear a bit more about what we're doing out here, we were lucky enough to have ABC Landline come out in 2018 and do a story on what we're doing out here and talk to not just myself, but the landholders involved and others then. So if you just, put that into Google, that'll come up and you can watch what we're doing there. Similarly, by all means, jump on your phone on the web and bring up our Not Just a Fence site. We developed this ourselves. We spent a lot of time monitoring and evaluating. We were seeing a lot of change in the paddock, but it's hard to convey that change, in Arial font 12. It's double spaced in a 200-page report, and I'm not sure anyone reads reports anymore anyway. So we developed this particular piece of technology to tell us the challenge, the solution, where people are at, and how it changed their lives in in real time on a device that they can look at their convenience. So I strongly encourage anyone that's interested to learn a bit more to jump on that. That shows you the maps and where everything is, and you can hear it from the landholders themselves. Similarly, as I mentioned, my name's Morgan Gronold. I'm with Rapid here in Barcaldine. You can Google me. There's not too many Gronolds around the place. And so, yeah, if you want to flick me an email or give me a ring and want to learn more about it, I'd be happy to talk more. So that's certainly my presentation from this end. I'll just